Initiative webinar. My clock says 2 o'clock, so why don't we go ahead and get started? I know we're probably going to have a few more people join us in the next minute or so, so we'll give them a chance to log on. If you want to put your name in the chat, feel free to do so. We like to see where everyone is from across the country. And as Becky Juleson from CoSA staff pointed out, make sure if you want the chat to be seen by everyone, that when you open up the chat window, everyone is selected in the to bar, because you can also chat an individual person or the team that's running the webinar individually as well. But make sure everyone is listed if you want to make the chat go out to everyone. My name is Sarah Kuntz, and I serve as the State Archivist for the state of North Carolina, and I'm also on the State Electronic Records Initiative Education Committee, and we're the group that is bringing you this webinar today. And in just a minute, we're going to get started, and we're going to hear a little bit more about some new resources that are available for digital records. And these resources are coming from a National Leadership for Libraries grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And that grant was written to gather, develop, and share some best practices and guidance materials to improve the creation, management, preservation, and use of permanent state government digital records and information. And we're going to be hearing in a minute from the chief consultant on that grant. She's going to tell us a little bit more about the collaborators and the products coming out of this wonderful grant that is just in the process of wrapping up. We will be taking questions at the end of her presentation. So if you want to put questions into the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you and call on you if you'd prefer to speak. So whatever format is the most preferable for you to interact, at the end we're going to have plenty of time for questions, and we'd love to hear your feedback or your thoughts on the presentation today. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I think we've had a few more people log on. Today we're going to be hearing, as I said, about the IMLS grant that was given to the Council of State Archivists through the State Electronic Records Initiative program. And we're going to be hearing today from Michelle Gallinger. And Michelle has been the chief consultant on this grant in particular. But Michelle is the principal of Gallinger Consulting, where she provides technological insight into decision-making for libraries, museums, archives, and businesses. She offers strategic planning guidance, develops policies, guidelines, and action plans for her clients, provides stakeholder facilitation services, coordinates collaborative technological initiatives as well. Michelle is the SERI coordinator and has consulted with CoSA on 2 of our IMLS grants. And prior to consulting, Michelle worked at the Library of Congress, developing the initial strategy for and the creation of the National Digital Stewardship Alliance, which started in 2010. She performed policy development, strategic planning, program planning, and research analysis when she was at the Library of Congress. She's also designed and managed digitization services, overseen the formation of and policy development for Colonial Williamsburg, Rockefeller Library's digital library, and worked for Gartner DataQuest. So she's got a very impressive resume, and I'm going to turn it over to Michelle for her to tell us about this grant. So Michelle.
Thanks, Sarah. So as Sarah was saying, the implementation of the Access Grant is building off of the earlier Planning Access Grant, also an IMLS grant. And this implementation is focused on the creation and preservation and use of electronic records. It is an IMLS National Leadership Grant. It started in October of 2017 and is wrapping up at the end of this month. And it's really focused on deepening the collaboration that CoSA has always been engaged with, particularly with professional associations that have adjacent interests. And we focused most heavily on the National Governors Association, NGA, the National Association of State CIOs, the National Association of Secretaries of State, and the Chief Officers State Library Association, as well as focusing on creating some materials for state government content creators with the idea that preserving state electronic records is easier if we educate the people who are doing the initial creation of those records. The goals of this grant were really to improve the preservation of state government electronic records through awareness and capacity building, and whenever possible, increase the use of permanent state electronic records. Sorry, wrong direction. The intention with this grant has always been to communicate the key digital preservation concepts and the first steps to acquiring, transferring, maintaining, and providing access to state electronic records, with the idea that if we customize the materials for specific audiences, use the key terminology that really resonates with them, that we will be more likely to get them to understand the importance of preservation for electronic records. And we also were looking throughout this entire grant process to raise awareness of the state and territorial archives, the work that they do, the support that they offer, and ways in which they can make managing electronic state records something that the agencies and the offices can do with support and do with help. So what's available now? Over the course of the 3-year grant, we have created about 25 documents. Those documents have been organized into categories based on the audience, because we have been really looking at creating materials that resonate with specific audiences, that have customized terminology. We grouped them based on their audience. And so I'll go over a little bit of what we have done for each of the various audiences. We created resources for state archivists. Here's the list. You can find it on the website as well. You know, I realized today that I took a lot of pictures for this presentation, but they're not the really gorgeous, stare into them, resonate while you hear more about the ideas kind of pictures. They're the pictures of documents. So unfortunately, I've added words to the words, but they're pictures of words, so hopefully you'll enjoy them. For resources for state archivists, one of the things that I think is most useful and most interesting is that we created the CoSA file formats guidelines. It's a jumping off point for state and territorial archivists to develop their own formats guidelines for file formats guidelines. There's a table in there of example format decisions for the content type and what preferred or acceptable formats might be for each content type. There's additional resources listed at the end of the document. The document draws heavily from materials published by NARA, materials from FAGI, the federal agency's digital guidelines initiative, which has a lot of really great materials in there. So the idea being that we noticed that not every state and territorial archive had file formats guidelines that they had written out and available on the web. And for those who are looking to update their file formats guidelines, or for those who are looking to create for the first time their file formats guidelines, this document gives some background information about why you might want file formats guidelines, what it might do for your archives to be able to communicate to content creators, to agencies creating the state electronic records, about how you might prefer things to come in. It gives some information about where you can learn more about different kinds of file formats and the challenges of maintaining them over time. So this is really an educational piece for state archives to help them develop the guidelines that they need. And then one of the other materials that we developed for state archives is a landscape survey about how archives are collecting and maintaining state government records that are put out on social media. So we did a survey with state and territorial archives. One of the things we learned was some practical tips. States recommended expanding the comment section and expanding posts and identifying who's liking things and to scroll fully through in order to capture everything. So there were some useful practical tips that came out of the survey. And there was also some information about what state and territorial archives are collecting in terms of public records on social media. So unsurprisingly, the big three, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, are most commonly captured by state and territorial archives. Flickr and Instagram are up there as well. And then nothing active, no active collection of social media is pretty far up in the bar graph as well. One thing that's particularly interesting is even though Facebook is being heavily collected at this time, and people identify that permanent state electronic records are being disseminated and published on Facebook, that state archives are having trouble archiving from Facebook and anything other than screen captures, web capture, and those are limited. So there are some states that, even though they recognize the importance of the material that's going out on Facebook, are double thinking, rethinking their commitment to capturing and preserving the materials on Facebook just because of the sheer challenge. So there's an opportunity for maybe CoSA to communicate the need to Facebook and for us to get the platform to consider some of the needs of the archival community. Another piece that we did for state archives that's intended to be a jumping off point is the State Interagency Electronic Records Transfer Checklist. So, the long title aside, this is really going through and saying, what do you need to do for electronic records transfer before, during, and after the transfer? What kinds of things does the state or territorial archives need to ask the agency or educate the agency how to do? What kinds of metadata do you need? What kinds of protocols should be in use for transfer? What are the concerns for demonstrating provenance and putting them into a preservation system? So again, this is a jumping off point document. It's supposed to help state and territorial archives develop or update their transfer guidelines. So that might be of interest to you all today. And then the last thing that I really wanted to highlight out of the resources for state archives is one of our more recent pieces, the Blockchain for Archives FAQ. Blockchain kind of took the world by storm a few years ago. I mean, I know that cryptocurrency has been using it for a number of years, but for a while there, everybody was talking about all of the possible uses for blockchain, and archives were being asked, are you going to be using blockchain? So this was really intended to be something that provides a high-level overview of how blockchain technology works and identifies the key issues that archives would be happy with how blockchain handles them, and also some key issues for archives that blockchain doesn't really handle. Blockchain, for instance, is not a preservation system. It demonstrates chain of custody brilliantly, but it does not provide you preservation for your materials. So this is really supposed to be something that helps state and territorial archives know what to say when people say, are you going to be using blockchain? This will help you evaluate whether or not the technology makes sense for your archives. We also created a number of resources for governors' offices. The relationship that CoSA has with NGO deepened over the course of this grant. Twice, CoSA has been asked to participate in educational webinars for incoming gubernatorial staff about records management. And we also created a number of documents that we co-branded with NGA. This is going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of using the terminology and communicating digital preservation issues in ways that best resonate with the audience. So we really wanted to talk about how preserving digital electronic records is a mechanism of managing risk, which is something that governors' offices really are concerned about. And this gave us an opportunity to really underscore some record-keeping principles that we felt very strongly about. For instance, keeping public business on public platforms rather than using personal accounts to promote public records. We also worked with NGA to create a social media use policy. This is sort of connected to the social media collection survey that we did. We knew that collecting, managing, and preserving electronic state records on social media would be easier if strong social media use policies were in place at the point of origin in the creators' offices. So again, we said, please be sensitive of any PII, please keep professional accounts professional and personal accounts personal, and don't commingle the information thereon. And this was something that NGA distributed pretty widely to their constituents. We also worked very closely with NAS, the National Association of Secretaries of State, and developed with them a number of co-branded documents. And those documents were more focused on the issues that group found compelling. So we got to talk with them about how public records come in many different shapes and forms, and that while public records are created in the process of government business and must be managed according to the state or territory laws and statutes, some of them may be open and some of them may be restricted. And how that gets determined over time is dependent upon your state or your territory's laws and the records themselves. So that was a very that was a document that NAS was very pleased with. The other thing that the NAS and CoSA were really concerned with during the lifespan of this grant was digital literacy. So they were concerned deeply about how people know what to trust on the internet and how to convey the importance of having trusted documents, having trusted electronic records, how to be smart about what you're seeing online. CoSA felt that this aligned nicely with Archive's goals in terms of providing provenance and providing reliable information. And so we collaborated with NAS and CoSA to create this information and misinformation infographic. And in addition, we did a second one that came out this year, which was about how to catch altered images. The first one was really quite popular with those professional associations. They distributed it widely. They had strong interest in doing another one, so we worked with them to do this one. And it highlights common ways that images are manipulated online, both in terms of being able to see in the image things that are probably not right, and also knowing when to check the date or get help from technology, when to question an image, not just in terms of what your eye actually sees, but what information you can glean from the computer as well. We also did a number of resources that were in conjunction with NASIA, with the state CIOs. And the most popular of all of the documents that we did over the course of this grant, by an order of magnitude, was this Playbook for Preservation of Electronic Records. It was completed in October of 2018 and has the top 11 plays to take in order to help preserve state electronic records. And number 11, which we snuck in there, it was supposed to be 10, but we couldn't let go of the most difficult play of all, which is constant money, providing reliable funds for the work of state electronic records management. And that document has had more than 2,200 downloads. So it's been really well received. An anecdote about it, which is kind of fun, is that one state CIO brought it to his state archivist and said, "Have you seen this?" And of course, the state archivist had been one of the state archivists who reviewed it. before we published it with NASCIO. So she said, yes, I have. It's very good, don't you think? And the state CIO said, yes, I think it is very good. So it's really nice to see the deep saturation that it's getting and the excitement that it's had. And then we also did with state CIOs a survey and a report about the survey, which was about content transfer, how state electronic records are getting from archivists to CIOs, getting from agencies to archivists, where CIOs are involved, where they're not involved, where the understanding of what happens during content transfer is the same between all of these groups, and where it is widely different. One of the things that we learned was that where transfers are happening from state agencies to archives, they are far and away mostly planned and manually transferred by agency staff. So we learned that there's an opportunity there to support automation, and in supporting automation, maybe get records on a more regular schedule. We also learned that that there are a lot of records that are not currently scheduled by agencies. That doesn't mean that they are not part of a record schedule according to the state laws and statutes, but that they are not ones that the agencies who are creating them currently have any plans to transfer. So that wasn't a big surprise for a lot of archives, but it presents an opportunity for us to work on. And then we created some general resources, and you'll see a few things on here that were listed before, but these are resources that we developed with the idea that they would go to stakeholders, they would go to the general public, they would help communicate the importance of digital preservation of electronic state records. One of the things that we created was an overview of electronic records. We're suggesting that if you have any plans for Electronic Records Day, October 10th, maybe this might be one of the documents that you might want to disseminate. You might want to tweet or Facebook or put on Instagram. It's intended for stakeholders. It's intended for the general public. What are electronic records? Why are they important? What should we be doing about them? So that's a good general piece. And then last year we created this poster for patrons who were walking through archives so that they could see something compelling and interesting. So we said, don't let your digital data fail the open test. So if anybody has a need for a poster again this year, this is available. And again, Electronic Records Day is October 10th. You're more than welcome to circulate any of the documents that we've created over the course of the Access Grant, whether it's for Electronic Records Day or for anything else you need. But let's talk for a minute about some of the outcomes of the grant. You know, how we measure success, what we think we want to do and what we actually did. We noticed when we grouped the documents that the resources for state CIOs were really the most heavily used. So we know that our connection there with NASCIO has been a strong one for years, and we know that they're reading the materials that we have created for them. And we're seeing a lot of downloads for a lot of these materials. These over 25 documents and slideshows we've created have had more than 6,000 downloads combined. You'll notice that the numbers don't quite add up to the total downloads. That's because I've deduplicated them off this slide. As I mentioned earlier, some of the documents appear in more than one category. So we've seen that these documents are having a reach. They're being downloaded frequently and with a longer lifespan than we anticipated. In May, I believe, we noticed that the NASCIO Playbook that I had mentioned to you all had 1,500 downloads. And now, as we run the numbers this week, we notice that it has 2,200 downloads. So we're seeing that these documents that we've spent the time to create have an interest and have a long interest, that they've been something that people are continuing to download and continuing to read over time. We also can see among the outcomes of the grant greater interconnectedness with the other professional associations that CoSA is aligned with. We have seen repeated webinars. We've seen other professional associations ask on an annual basis for us to participate in their training webinars. We've had all of these co-branded publications. They've been circulated to the CoSA member community. They've been circulated to the other professional associations member community. We're getting those numbers of downloads because the reach of the connected community is much greater than CoSA's reach by itself. And we're seeing increased awareness of electronic records issues. One story that I like to tell is how NAS had gotten so used to the rhythm of CoSA's year that before Barbara even got to send them the Electronic Records Day information in 2019, they emailed and said, is the Electronic Records Day coming up? Because we're really looking forward to that information. It's something that our member community really appreciates. So when I hear that, I hear that not only have electronic records issues really permeated that group to an extent, but that they are hungry for more information, that they know to look to CoSA for that information, and they're happy to share that information with their members, increase the electronic records issues among secretaries of state. So that, I meant to put in one extra slide, and I'm sorry that I forgot to do that, but what I meant to say was that we have coming soon also what I hope will be a timely and topical short piece on managing electronic records while working from home. And this piece will talk about how to manage PII, to remember to contact your departmental or state CIOs to properly use the right cybersecurity techniques, how to manage document destruction if you have to do it at home, to remember that public documents are public documents, whether they're on your home computer or whether they're on the cloud. It is intended to be a piece that can educate certainly people in state archives, but it's intended to be sort of more broadly informative, something that state archives and territorial archives can circulate to agencies and organizations that have staff working from home during this time on how to manage the records that they are creating in their homework environment. And that is, I think, everything. So if people have any questions or if people want to talk a little bit about any of, if you would be interested in that.
Thanks, Michelle. For those of us that have been around for this whole grant, it's great to see all the pieces kind of come together and hear summaries of use and connections across the whole landscape of the grant. And as Michelle said, I encourage you to think about questions, put them in chat, raise your hand if you want to be called on, if you prefer to speak. While we're waiting for people to think about questions, I would just add, for those of you that are new to the SERI initiative or new to the state archives, or maybe haven't seen it in the past, Electronic Records Day is something we started several years ago as a way to draw attention to the issues around electronic records management and preservation. And I think this year is a particularly good year coming on the wrap-up of this grant. There's many resources here that can be used. Michelle highlighted a few of them that can be used not only for your own social media, for your stakeholders, but maybe to reach out to one of your state agencies, your Secretary of State, your state head of information technology, or your governor's office using one of these co-branded materials maybe from an association they're a member of, and say, hey, you know, it's Archives Month in October, and in the middle of that month we're focusing on the importance of electronic records management. Here's some information for you on how we can be of service and how we can interface with you on these issues. So there's lots of good stuff here that seems like it's very timely that they're all available now for use in your social media and your training components. So I just draw your attention to that.
And I'm going to put in the chat for everyone the direct link to all of the IMLS Access Grant products. So you can just follow that link in the chat. You can get to all of the documents. As I have outlined, they are grouped based on intended audience. But as Sarah pointed out, you can use any of them for any. The state legislature is going to resonate with them that you have something that came from NGA, from the National Governors Association. Do it.
Michelle, I have a question. As you're looking forward to thinking about the final report for the grant, is there any particular through line or takeaway that you have about collaborations, maybe formats that are most useful, or styles that resonate broadly across audiences, or what sorts of, I guess, high-level findings do you think will be written about this whole project?
I think that's a great question. I think that what we're going to find in general is that there are opportunities for specific some of the work, particularly around content transfer, and particularly around sorry, I think I'm cutting out a little bit. Am I back on?
You're back on, yeah.
Oh, good. Sorry about that. Working from home, right?
Exactly.
So what I was trying to say in response to your question, Sarah, was that I think that there have been, one of the things that we have identified through the course of this grant is that there are opportunities for policy development, particularly around content transfer, that so much of the work of content transfer and to a certain extent the work of capturing social media, state electronic records on social media is being done on an ad hoc basis, that people are figuring it out as they go along, which is a really critical and important first step. But after that first step, the next step is the opportunity is to codify it and to make it regular and dependable so that you create institutional knowledge beyond the individual doing the work. So that becomes an opportunity for the state or territorial archive to have continuity beyond staff changes, as well as educate and inform other state and territorial archives about what they're doing to create sort of a cascade effect of policy and guideline development, workflow development. So, so I think that, I hope that some of the documents that we've created through the course of this grant will be used to help state and territorial archives develop the guidelines that are the next step to creating institutional knowledge, because there's already great work being done. People are passionate about identifying and collecting state electronic records wherever they are. And the next step is to make that more automated and more institutional rather than individual.
Thank you. Any questions? Barbara Teague, the executive director from CoSA, also mentioned too, I would highlight that if you haven't looked at the resource center that CoSA runs, that's a great place to find materials. And as she pointed out, we add things like these products to the resource center, and you can search them by subject or other ways that they fit into your electronic records program and standards.
And
yeah,
certainly, if you are looking for materials to promote for Electronic Records Day or just in general, the Resource Center is a great place to do that. One of our co-chairs for SERI, Patsy Mitchell, has identified recently something in the Resource Center about how to use primary sources in archives for K-12 learning, and we were able to promote that on the CoSA social media. So there's just really nice things in there that can help you in communicating the importance of state and territorial archives.
Any other questions? Nobody has questions. It's a quiet Tuesday. Hopefully I'm not missing anybody's hand raised either.
Well, as Sarah mentioned, this grant is wrapping up. It'll be done at the end of the month, and we will be rerunning the numbers for the number of downloads for the documents before the final report is submitted to IMLS. So as much as we want to be this webinar, we want this webinar to be a resource for you and make it something that so you know what's out there and what's available, we are also hoping that you will be inspired to download and pass on these documents so that we can show even greater reach and even greater involvement when we submit the final report to IMLS. So please look at the documents, send them to other people. It'll be a big help for us.
Absolutely. Well, if there's no other questions, Michelle, you want to advance to the next slide?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So here's a good place for you to find how to stay connected and informed with CoSA. I would put a particular plug for our Facebook page. It's a great place to find resources about what other state archives are doing. And it's sort of like, I like to think of it like an aggregator of all good social media things from other state archives. So it's a fun way to watch what other sister institutions are up to. But certainly there's other resources there. There's the link to the Resource Center and our website where you can find information on future webinars, both for the membership and through the State Electronic Records Initiative. So we have regular webinar series, and we encourage you to visit the webpage and check those out and register for those. They are all free. So do stay connected and informed with CoSA.
I do see a question now.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like the question is, do we have any sense of how these groups, meaning the other professional associations, may be using the information in the resources? We know that they're downloading and reading. We know that they're connected and that they are connecting, we know anecdotally, to their state archives around these resources. Beyond that, I don't know that we have additional metrics for how they are being used. I think those are the only that we know that they're being used, read, and circulated, and that's about it.
Yeah, and I think for particular groups like the National Governors Association, they have specific timelines that they use around changes in administration. So I know that there's specific use around those time periods. So again, after an election, there will be interest in using those resources about transferring records and preserving social media and other things that we had done with them.
And we saw that around National Association of Secretaries of State as well, that some of the documents about how to manage records for constitutional officers were downloaded more frequently after elections. So we have some sense of the timing of how they're being used. And we have some sense that they are being widely distributed on repeat basis. But we haven't seen any, nobody has come back to us with documentation that they have created based on these documents. We know that they're informing their understanding of their obligations to state electronic records. We have not seen an outcome as to what that actually looks like yet.
Okay, Barbara has also drawn attention in the chat to the promotional materials for Electronic Records Day and a link in there, so that's a great place to go to pick up some branded materials that you can use for promotion in October. So do check those out as well. And as you close out of the webinar, you're going to get an evaluation about it. So please do take a minute. It's just a couple questions, and we really do use those questions to figure out what you want to hear about and what future webinar topics could be. So take a couple minutes to help us plan for our future programming. And with that, I thank everyone and have a good rest of your day.